Hi, welcome to FCC Live. My name is Jerica. I'm the Director of Outreach here at the church. We are so glad that you're joining us, especially if this is your first time. I just want to give a special welcome. We are so glad that you chose to watch live with us this morning. Last week, Julia shared with us on our FCC Instagram some amazing pictures of some students that are getting to meet live right here on our campus during our midweek programs. Our high school and junior high programs are getting to meet here on our campus. It has been amazing getting to watch those students reunite with their friends and just have an incredible time, and it is definitely something worth celebrating. Also, something we're celebrating that I am really excited about is we just finished our food drive. For the whole month of July, we did a food drive. And the first week alone, we raised $1,600. But guess how much we raised for the entirety of the month of July? Drum roll, please. That was awesome. We raised over $5,000. Incredible. If you don't know what $5,000 worth of food looks like, here's a little glimpse right here. Just amazing. Thank you so much for the impact that you guys had participating in that, and to Grocery Outlet for making that happen. We are so grateful. All of that food is going to impact families who are most impacted by COVID-19 during this time in our community. And so we are just so blown away by your generosity. Thank you so much. I want to tell you about something also really exciting that you can participate in. fcchb.com/write, WRITE. You can go there to learn about how you can encourage some of our global outreach partners. Maybe you didn't know that we had any outreach partners. We have outreach partners right here in our community, but we also have outreach partners that are all across the world, all across our globe, that are working to bring the hope and love that God brings to their communities, especially during this challenging time. You can go to fcchb.com/write to learn about those global outreach partners and to send in an encouraging note or letter or an encouraging prayer. I know it would mean the world to our outreach partners. Thanks again so much for joining us this morning. I want to encourage you, don't go anywhere, because FCCHB Live starts right now.
Night is falling and hope is lost, and still you're calling me. When faith is lost and my hope exhausted, you will be my strength. When my mind says I'm not good enough, God, you're enough for me. I've decided I'm not giving up, 'cause you won't give up on me. You won't give up on me. Your love is holding on and it won't let go. Feel it breaking out like an Your presence is an open door. We want you, Lord, like never before. Your presence is an open door. So come now, Lord, like never before.
I just want to take a minute to thank all of you who regularly give here at FCC, especially during this time. Some of you have even upped your giving. We are so grateful for that. The ways that it allows us to continue meeting critical needs in our community and continuing to create ways for people to engage with us during this challenging time. So thank you so much. If you'd like to give with us, we've made it really easy to do so. You can go online to fcchb.com/give. You can also download the FCCHB app, or you can send in a check if that is best for you. I want to take a minute to talk to all the families listening. I'm a mom myself. I have a 3-month-old and a 2.5-year-old, and so I know what it's like to experience all of these really conflicting, crazy emotions during this challenging time. We have something starting tomorrow that's for you that's called Building Stronger Families. It's with Growth Track. This is our third session of Growth Track. And Growth Track, Building Stronger Families, it's a 4-week session where we're going to dive deep into learning about what God's view of families are and how families can build each other up, what it means to raise a teenager or even little ones during this really difficult time. I am so excited for Growth Track. If that sounds like something that piques your interest, you want to learn more too, go on to fcchb.com/growth track. You can get all of the course details there and the registration.
Well, hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us this weekend. We're just so grateful to get to hang out with you. And I wanted to let you know that we are continuing with our Q&A portion as part of our service. And so if you have a question that comes up during the message, we'd love for you just to text that in. And we've received a number of great questions over the past couple weeks. And so if you just text in a question, we'll spend a little bit of time at the end of our service going over those. And we'll also just throw that number in the chats as well so you can see it in a little bit. Well, speaking of questions, I want to begin with one today. Have you had a moment recently where you had some expectations for how something was supposed to go, but then your actual experience or the reality of it was really different? Like there was this big space between how you thought it might be and then what actually took place. Now you might say, of course, because as humans, we tend to do that all the time. We tend to have these expectations, great expectations, and oftentimes our reality or experience is vastly different. In fact, it's been said that the space between expectations and our experience is pain, and it's the pain of disappointment or things not working out. And when we're able to kind of release those expectations, we enjoy the experience a little more. You know, a couple years ago, there was this incredible thing that came out for movie lovers that was called MoviePass. I don't know if maybe you had this, you're aware of it, but MoviePass was this monthly subscription that happened where it was like $10 a month and you could see unlimited movies. And eventually it fell apart and the price point didn't work, but for like a year or two, it was awesome. And I was working at a church with a number of junior high, high school, and college and young adults, and we just went to the movies a lot. Like after church we'd go, after our midweek we'd go, and I saw a lot of movies during that time. I'm not going to tell you how many times I saw Star Wars: The Last Jedi because it's kind of an embarrassingly high number. But I noticed something about MoviePass that let me kind of let go of the expectations that I had about movies. Like if there was a big blockbuster coming out and I had waited 6 months or a year, it would still probably be great, but I could find some things to be maybe a little critical about. But when I went to a movie without any expectations, just on a whim, my experience was so different. Now, this doesn't mean I didn't see a lot of bad movies, because I did, and there were some movies I saw that I was like, well, I'm never going to see that again, or I even left the theater sometimes. But the experience was so different when it wasn't held hostage by expectations. You know, as people, we get this, we understand this, but it's challenging, isn't it? And it's especially difficult to let go of expectations when it comes to other people. Like we tend to hold others hostage to how we think they should be or what they should do, that oftentimes we can miss out on simply engaging in a relationship with them. That we can have all of these expectations that guide us, that we miss out just on the here and now. You know, we've been in this series for a couple weeks called Re-Entry, and we've been talking about these stories from the Bible of men and women who had these re-entry experiences where they left their homeland, where they left something that was familiar, and they had to re-enter into this new way of living. And we've been talking about some of those lessons that they learn and some that we've been learning during this difficult time. And today we're going to look at one final story together that comes from the very first book of the Bible, Genesis. And it's a story about two brothers. And it's a story about expectations, and it's a story about acceptance, and it's a story about change and what it means to come back together. And these two brothers are named Jacob and Esau, and we read about their story in the middle part of the book of Genesis. Now, their story is really important because they're part of this long line of history of something that God was doing in the world. Their father is a guy named Isaac, and Isaac is the son of Abraham. And Abraham was the guy that God spoke to and said, through you, Abraham, I'm going to build a new nation, and you're going to be the father of many people, and through you, I'm going to bless all people. And so that vision started with Abraham, and then he had his son Isaac, and then Isaac has these two brothers that are twins named Jacob and Esau. But these two brothers, they begin life kind of in this place of competition and rivalry. In fact, we're told that things are going to be different in this family because the younger brother Jacob is actually going to lead the older brother, which wasn't necessarily a common thing. So the story begins in Genesis 25, and we read this if we jump ahead to that chapter. When the time came for her to give birth, there were two twin boys in her womb. The first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, so they named him Esau. After this, his brother came out with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so he was named Jacob. Now, in the Bible, it's kind of interesting when names are given to kids. Usually they're very literal, very descriptive, and so Esau, he's red, so they call him Esau, which means red. But Jacob, when he's born, he's actually grasping his brother's heel, which is kind of an interesting image, like he's like holding on for dear life. And so they call him Jacob, which means heel grabber, which is a euphemism for deceiver, somebody who deceives others. And when we look at Jacob's life, he uses deception over and over again to kind of get what he wants, and we see how he uses this deception against his own family. See, a couple of chapters later, the boys, they're growing up, and Esau, we're told that he kind of is this rugged, outdoors, kind of wild guy, and he hunts, and he just is really kind of that guy that's just going out and doing a lot of things. And his father, Isaac, really kind of loves Esau. But Jacob is described as being a little more quiet. He stays at home. He spends more time with his mother, Rebekah, and so she kind of loves Jacob. So already these two brothers have a parent that favors the different one, and they kind of are fighting against each other. Well, one day Esau, he comes back from a day of hunting, and he's really hungry, and he goes to his brother who's in the kitchen, and he's making some stew, and apparently this looks really good, and he tells his brother Jacob, give me some of that soup. Like, I want it. He demands it. And Jacob, being somebody who's pretty smart and conniving and also somebody who is a little bit of a deceiver, says, okay, sure, I'll give you some stew, but it's going to cost you something. And Jacob asks his brother for his birthright. Now, a birthright might not mean much to us, but essentially what that meant in that culture was a double portion of your father's inheritance. So you were going to get more than anyone else. So in this moment of weakness and impulse, Esau's like, soup, birthright, and so he decides to give that away for this immediate thing. And Jacob deceives him that way. Now, Esau, reflecting on this moment, might later on say, well, that's like strike one for my brother Jacob. But the greater deception is actually still to come. So a couple chapters later, we learn that Isaac is approaching the end of his life. He's getting older and he's about to die. And so he wants to do sort of his final act as a father, which was to give one of his sons a blessing. And so as he's preparing for this, he asks Esau to come into his room to get this blessing. And we read this in Genesis 27. When Isaac was old and his eyes were weak so that he could no longer see, he called for Esau, his older son, and he said to him, "My son." "Here I am," he answered. Isaac said, "I am now an old man, and I don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like, and bring it to me so that I may eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." So Isaac, he calls in his son Esau, and he says, "Esau, I want you to go do the thing that you do best. I want you to go hunt, and I want you to go get some of that food that I know that you can make for me, and then come in, we're going to have this special moment together, and I'm going to bless you." So Esau, he goes off to do this thing his father asked. Well, while this is happening, Jacob and his mother hear about this blessing, and they devise a plan. In fact, Jacob's mother, Rebekah, she says to him, "Son, I know how your father likes his food, so I'm going to go ahead and prepare that, and then you're going to disguise yourself as your brother, and you're going to go in there and get the blessing." And so since Esau is kind of this like hairy guy, and he's an outdoorsman, they take goat skin and they put it on Jacob's arm so that he feels like his brother. They even take Esau's clothes, which smell of, the outdoors, and Jacob wears those. And he gets this soup and he goes in and he takes the blessing that was for his brother, deceiving his father. In fact, Isaac you can almost tell that he knows something is wrong. He says this in the story. We skip down to the next verse. "Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, 'The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau.'" It's almost like Isaac is like, well, something is off here. It doesn't sound like Esau, but kind of feels like him. And so the blessing is given. Now, the blessing, like the birthright, was this important thing. Essentially, this was Isaac saying to Jacob, "You're going to lead the family. Like, everything that I have is yours, and everyone else is going to sort of be subservient to you." And this blessing, he thought was going to go to Esau, but it goes instead to Jacob. Well, Jacob receives this, and he leaves. And Esau comes back after, being out and hunting, and he does the very things his father asked, and he brings in the soup, and he's like, "All right, Dad, here I am. I'm ready for this blessing that you promised me." And then in the story, there's just this moment of realization where Isaac understands that he's given the blessing to Jacob, where Esau understands that he's missed out, and there's pain. In fact, the story says that Esau let out a loud and bitter cry. And he says to his dad, it's kind of a sad part of the story, he says, "Dad, is there any blessing left for me? Like, do you have anything left?" And his dad's answer is basically, "No. I mean, yes, I'll give you a blessing, but it's going to be secondary to your brother, and you're actually going to end up serving him." See, in the story between these two brothers, there's this breaking point. What happens next is Jacob is told to get out of town. Jacob's mom, she says, "Jacob, you got to leave. Like, your brother, you don't understand like how upset he is, how angry he is." In fact, the story tells us of what's going on in Esau's mind. It says, "Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him. And he said to himself, 'The days of mourning for my father are near, and then I will kill my brother Jacob.'" There's another translation that says that Esau was consoling himself with the thought of killing his brother. I mean, that's intense. So Jacob leaves, and Esau leaves too. And these brothers that grew up together, that spent all this time together, they now separate. In fact, what happens for the next 6 chapters of this story is we hear about these brothers and their lives lived independently of each other. And they kind of go into their own quarantine, their own social distancing that happens for 20 years. 20 years they spend apart. In fact, I have a map that sort of shows the distance between them. So their story, it started down in this place called Beersheba, where they were from and where they had this deception initially happen. And then Jacob goes on this journey all throughout Israel. He actually gets out of Israel and goes up to this place called Haran, which is about 500 miles away from his homeland. I mean, you're talking about a lot of space between these brothers. And time goes on. And these brothers experience different things. Esau, he goes his own way. He has wives. He has a family. He kind of creates his own future. And Jacob begins this series of encounters and experiences that change him along the way too. One of the things that we learn about Jacob is he begins to kind of go through these different testings that happen in his life, these different encounters. Like he finds a woman he's going to marry and actually ends up having 2 wives and all these children. But he begins to go back and forth with this character who's named Laban, who is his new father-in-law. And they sort of deceive each other, like back and forth, like Laban deceives Jacob and then Jacob kind of gets back. And then they just kind of keep competing. And eventually Jacob, he has all these children, he amasses this wealth, and life is kind of going good. But he realizes he can no longer stay here. He has to return home. And so he flees from this new place and he returns back home. But Jacob knows that when he's returning home, he has a brother that's waiting for him on the way, Esau. And even though 20 years of time have passed, Jacob wonders, has Esau changed? Jacob understands the things that he's gone through, the ways that he's grown, but what about his brother? And it's almost like Jacob is kind of trying to test the waters of what it'll be like to re-enter and to meet his brother again. In fact, as he's making his way back home, he sort of sends ahead these gifts to his brother just to kind of, appease him, almost like he's saying, hey, brother, remember that deception? Remember the blessing? I mean, are we okay? Is that like water under the bridge, or are you still holding that grudge from all those years ago? So Jacob sort of does this to try and appease his brother, but in many ways, Jacob has also changed some himself. He's been through some experiences, and he's not the same person that he was when he left all those years ago. There's actually one final event in Jacob's life right before he meets his brother that changes him and gives him a new perspective. It's kind of an interesting story, and I would encourage you to read it, but Jacob actually ends up wrestling with this character that he meets. He comes across this man, and they just have this wrestling match, and they kind of wrestle until dawn, and then Jacob demands a blessing, and it turns out that he was actually wrestling God. And God says, Jacob, I'm going to give you a new name. No longer are you going to be called Jacob the deceiver. Now you're going to be called Israel, which means one who strives or fights or wrestles with God. It's an incredible moment in Jacob's story where he's humbled, and his perspective, it changes. Some people have said this is kind of Jacob sort of wrestling with his own conscience, wrestling with his past and who he's been, and now he's given a new vision of who he's going to be moving forward. So this happens, and then Jacob prepares to meet his brother Esau. And the way that the story is set up, it's so interesting. Like there's kind of this tension, like you're just wondering what's going to happen when these brothers who have been separated for 20 years come back together. In Genesis 33, it describes this meeting that takes place. It says, Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men. So imagine this. Here's Jacob, and he looks up and he sees his brother, and he sees just this huge amount of people, and Jacob is preparing for the worst. Like, it's almost like, okay, all those things that I worried about, all those fears that I had for so long, now they're coming true. Here's my brother, and he's ready to pay me back for what happened all those years ago. So Jacob, he divided the children among Leah and Rachel, which were his wives, and the 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. Then he himself went on ahead, and he bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. So Jacob, he's trying to sort of save his livelihood and his family. He divides them up. He's preparing for an attack, and then he takes this posture of humility, of surrender, and he bows down before his brother. Almost like he's just, okay, whatever's going to happen, let's see what takes place. But look how Esau responds in verse 4. It says this, but Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and he kissed him, and they wept. I mean, after 20 years of separation, after all of this fear, after all of this resentment that was there and just not knowing what was going to happen, how do the brothers handle this? They hug it out, which is amazing. Like they hug it out. Esau runs to his brother and embraces him. He shows him compassion and love and acceptance. See, in this moment, Jacob begins to try and kind of give away things to Esau, knowing that he got the blessing. He's like, Esau, let me give you some of my goats. Let me give you some of my servants. Let me just kind of give you what I've been blessed with. But I love how Esau responds if we jump down to verse 9. But Esau said, I already have plenty. my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. Esau almost says to him, I'm satisfied. I'm okay with life. You don't need to pay me back for anything. But Jacob kind of keeps trying to give Esau things, and Esau eventually is like, okay, sure. Jacob says, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God. And the brothers have this incredible reunion that takes place. Now, the story ends with the brothers going their separate ways again. Esau goes his way, Jacob goes his way. But it's not before this incredible moment of reconciliation. It's not before this beautiful picture of forgiveness and acceptance. You know, we've been in this series for a couple weeks now looking at these different stories of reentry. And we've been seeing ourselves in the pages of Scripture. And I think a lot of us, when we read this story, we might feel kind of like Jacob. Like, we know what we've been through in our lives during the past few months. We know the challenges that we've had and the experiences that have changed us, that we've grown through, and the things we're currently going through. But sometimes we don't think about the things other people might be going through as well. Our mind is sort of focused on us, and maybe we're even blind to some of those things other people are going through. And maybe we even are approaching each other with these expectations for how they should be or how they should act, and we're missing out on just the reality that we've all gone through difficult things. You know, Jacob was humbled. He gained a perspective, but Esau also learned forgiveness and to let go and to not let resentment lead him. They both were able to receive something new. So the thing that we have been talking about and that we know is there's no such thing as going backwards. We're only going forwards. And it would be really easy for us to reject our new reality. We can hold on to expectations and what we think things should be or how they should be, but we might miss out on just the reality of living in the here and now and what it means to actually connect and help one another. What it means to have a focus that's outside of ourselves and actually place that on other people. You know, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, he writes this letter to a church in Corinth. Letter's called 1 Corinthians. And in the beginning part of this letter, he talks about some of the issues that this church has, and they have a ton of them. There's divisions happening. There's some moral issues. There's teachers that they're favoring, and they're kind of looking at Paul like he might not be, you know, this person that's able to communicate clearly. And so Paul kind of goes through all of these different arguments and all these different things that they're debating with him, and he comes away with just this clear vision of how he wants to act and what his message really is. And he says this in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. He said, I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. Essentially, Paul was saying, you know, out of everything that's happening, here's what I know to be true. The most important thing is that God loves you. He loved you enough to send his son to die for you, so I'm going to love you too. I'm going to resolve to know this one thing, the gospel. And that singular vision was what motivated Paul in his ministry. That singular vision is how he led forward in the church. See, I wonder if we might have a singular vision that we can have for one another, to resolve to know one thing, to resolve to do one thing for each other. You know, I love the author, Brené Brown, and I love what she said about this in terms of how we see one another. She said this, all I know is that my life is better when I assume that people are doing their best. It keeps me out of judgment and lets me focus on what is and not what should or could be. See, I wonder if right now is the perfect time for us to have a lot of grace for one another. If maybe we can go as far as to just to give people the benefit of the doubt. That we know that we've gone through things and we've changed, but so have other people, and we can meet them with kindness and grace and goodness. You know, I love something that Scott said in the message last week, that instead of focusing on making a point, we can focus on making a difference. And I wonder if one of the greatest differences that we can make in each other's lives is to have this attitude of acceptance towards each other, to share love with each other. And maybe we could have a singular vision that does this one thing, where we could learn to release our expectations and embrace gratitude. To release expectations and embrace gratitude. You know, as humans, we always are going to have expectations. It's just something that we deal with. But what if we didn't let those expectations have so much influence and power, but we begin to let them go? Because expectations often lead to rejection and resentment, but gratitude, when we can be thankful for our lives, for one another, that fuels a life of love and acceptance and kindness towards one another. See, church, we know that we're not going backwards, only forwards. And what if we did so as people who are clinging on to gratitude, who are holding on to love, who are realizing during this crazy time that we've changed, but so have other people, and we're willing to meet them where they are. You know, right now, I think it's really easy to be somebody who is cynical. Like, cynicism is easy, and I get it. Like things are negative, and we're frustrated, and there's things we're hoping for, and we're not sure how those are going to, pan out for us. But joy is a choice. And joy actually is a lot more difficult than cynicism, because joy takes the good and the bad and it goes deeper. It holds both of those together. It trusts in God. It trusts in His presence in our lives, that He's working in us, that He's working in other people. And it's able to surrender some of those expectations to trust in who God is and what God has done in the past and what He will continue to do. You know, we've had this theme verse for the past couple weeks, and I can't think of any better way to wrap up this series than to look at this verse one more time. And it comes from Ephesians 5, and Paul says this: "Follow God's example, therefore, as dearly loved children, and walk in the way of love." Walk in the way of love. Exist in the way of love. In everything we do, may it be grounded in love. So, church, as we embrace this new season, we know we're not going backwards, only forwards. What if we did that as people committed to walk in the way of love, where we would release expectations and embrace gratitude?
And this is one that comes out of the book of John. And in the Gospel of John, Jesus is praying for all future believers. And what He prays for us is that all future believers would be united in love, and that people would come to know God based on our love for each other. And so right now, as we sing this next song, I want to challenge you guys, encourage you guys to make this a prayer, to ask God to search your heart and say, how can my life reflect that love of God in such a way that draws other people toward the heart of God? Let's sing this together. Sisters, one with our brothers, one family by the blood. Come on, make us one, make us one. Your will be done. Make us one. One heart with
I'll believe that the future is brighter. I'll believe in His promise for me. I'll believe that He's working and He's not done. The best is yet to come. I know He makes the anxious courageous. I know He makes the doubters believe. I know He won't stop working 'cause He's not done. The best is yet to come. Come on! I've got this hope in my soul. I know You won't let me go. Lord, I believe with Your life in me, I trust You could. The best is yet to come. I'll believe that He gives second chances. I believe He works all things for good. I believe that He's working and He's not done. The best is yet to come. Yeah, I've got this hope in my soul. I know You won't let me go. Lord, I believe with Your life in me, I just begun. Yeah, I've got this hope in my soul. I know You won't let me go. Lord, I believe with Your life in me, I just begun. The best is yet to come. Sing, I got hopes. I've got my hopes high. You make my hopes rise. I've got my hopes high. You hold my whole life. I've got my hopes high. You make my hopes rise. I've got my hopes high. You hold my whole life. I've got my hopes high. You make my hopes rise. I've got my hopes high. You hold my whole life. I've got my hopes high. You make my hopes rise. I've got my hopes high. You hold my whole life. Yeah, I've got this hope in my soul. I know You won't let me go. Lord, I believe with Your life in me, I just begun. Yeah, I've got this hope in my soul. I know You won't let me go. Lord, I believe with Your life in me, I just begun. The best is yet to come.
Hey everyone, again, I'm Jericho. I'm the director of outreach here. Thank you, Stephen, so much for just an awesome message on Jacob and Esau. I was encouraged, challenged. We had some great questions that came in. This first question was a doozy. I totally resonate and have felt this question so many times throughout my life. One of the questions that was asked is, how do we react in love when we are deceived by others?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question, and that's a real question, and I'm sure one that we've all struggled with. And I guess I would begin by saying that putting that into practice is a lot tougher than just it being a theoretical thing. When you've been hurt, when you've been deceived by someone, especially someone close to you, and I think of the story of Jacob and Esau where it was like brothers, then that really does leave deep wounds. But that response in love, I think first and foremost comes from our dependence on God, that we kind of realize that we can't do that on ourselves. Like, if it's up to us, we're not going to be able to react in love. We're going to want to get even. We're going to want to maybe hurt the way that we've been hurt. But just centering ourselves in God's presence and allowing God to continue to work just in our hearts and going deeper into that reliance and dependence on God through prayer and just through connecting with Him. I think that's the gateway that allows us to take some time apart, think about our words, and there's some practical things that we probably all know, like take time to, respond, maybe even take some time apart to just really to heal, to let God heal that wound before you can choose love as your response.
Yeah, that's so great. I've often felt that need. Like you said, it's totally a work of God. I've had to just every day lift up my hands and say, God, if I'm going to let go of this or forgive or love, it's because of you and your strength alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the questions that I had is, how do we actually let go of expectations? You talked a lot about expectations and how it's sometimes just hardwired into us. So because of that, I mean, what are some helpful things or practices to let go of those expectations?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, obviously as humans, we struggle with expectations and we tend to have them. But I think one of the first things that we can do is just to develop an awareness of where those expectations are coming from. Really paying attention to what's driving those in our lives. And sometimes, expectations or desires, they maybe are motivated by some of our own struggles or insecurity, maybe expectations that other people have placed on us, and we are internalizing those and kind of projecting those on other people. And so I think that awareness is key, just really kind of getting to know just where are these coming from, what's kind of happening in the core of my being, and that allows us to maybe hit pause or hit the brakes and kind of adjust before maybe we let those expectations kind of go crazy. But I think also within that is just gratitude. The importance of being grateful and being thankful for our life and for God and what He's done. And the more that we can be, full of gratitude and we can see God as being gracious towards us, I mean, that changes how we respond to the world and how we see other people. There's a lot of little practical things that I've heard, every day. List 3 things that you're grateful for. Some people do like 10, or the first thing they do when they wake up in the morning in their prayer is just, God, I'm grateful for, this. And I think that just kind of, again, grounds us in the here and now and allows us to be grateful for God and what He's done. And that gives us that perspective moving forward.
Yeah, awesome. I've done some of those things, wake up every morning and list 10 things I'm grateful for. And I thought it was silly at first, I'll admit, and I just can't even believe week after week of doing that, of thinking it was silly, all of a sudden my entire worldview shifted and my perspective and the way that I viewed people and the problems and challenges around me totally shifted when I started coming from a place of gratitude. Yeah,
Definitely.
What are maybe some things that you are reading or podcasts you're listening to or resources that you're diving deeper into in relation to what you talked about today?
Yeah, that's great. Well, there's no shortage of content out there when it comes to developing our relationship with God and learning. I mean, we just have so much stuff out there. One of the people that Scott talks a lot about is a guy named N.T. Wright, and he's one of my favorites too. He's this preeminent New Testament scholar, just brilliant, and he has written a ton of books. I don't know how many, but one book that I would suggest if you're kind of wanting to go a little deeper, maybe you're kind of beginning your Christian walk, would be a book called Simply Christian that he wrote. It's just an incredible kind of overview of the Christian faith, and it's contemporary, and I just think it's a great tool. He also has a podcast, and if you were to Google just N.T. Wright podcast, you would find it, and it's like a Q&A kind of thing like this, where he gets answers and kind of dives in, or questions and dives into those answers. So that's a great resource. There's a couple other podcasts that I think are pretty cool for kind of growing deeper in your knowledge of the Bible. There's one that's called The Naked Bible, and that sounds like a weird title, but it just kind of means like just the Bible, and it's an exploration kind of verse by verse, chapter by chapter through different books in the Bible. So that one's pretty great. And then finally, I would add for me a book that I read recently that I loved was Anxious for Nothing by Max Lucado, who wrote this book a couple years ago, but it seems like he wrote it for right now, and that was really helpful for me, just going through a time where there's a lot of anxiety and stress, and just learning to surrender that to God.
Oh, awesome. My husband loves Max Lucado. I'm going to have to check that one out.
Yeah.
That's great. I've heard great things about that resource. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. We are just about to wrap up here. I want to tell you about something awesome if you missed it. It's on our FCCHB Instagram. Last week we shared about a quarantine care package. There's some pretty sweet stuff in there. I remember seeing some board games. I think that there's some coffee. There's maybe a $50 gift card, maybe. You'll just have to go check it out for yourself. So if you don't follow us already, you can find us on Instagram at FCCHB. Go check us out, like that post, follow the instructions so that you can win that quarantine care package. Lastly, if you are new or you've been checking us out for a little bit, we would love to know your name. We'd love to get to know you. You can tell us who you are by going to fcchb.com/connect card. Fill that out, and we would love to send you a free digital gift just to say thanks for joining us this morning. Thanks so much. We hope you have a great rest of your day and enjoy the sunshine.
Run away with me. Lost soul to reverie. Running wild and running free. Two kids, you and me. And I say, hey, hey, live it like we're renegades. Hey, hey, live it like we're renegades, renegades, renegades. Long live the pioneers, rebels and mutineers. Go forth and have no fear. Come close and lend an ear. And I say, hey, hey, live it like we're renegades. Hey, hey, live it like we're renegades, renegades, renegades. All hail the underdogs. All hail the new kids. All hail the outlaws. Spielbergs and Kubricks. It's our time to make a move. It's our time to make amends. It's our time to break the rules. Let's begin. And I say, hey, hey, live it like we're renegades. Hey, hey, live it like we're renegades, renegades, all the life she has seen, oh, the meaner side of me. They took away the prophet's dream for a prophet on the street. Now she's stronger than you know. A heart of steel starts to grow. All his life he's been told he'll be nothing when he's old. All the kicks and all the blows, he won't ever let it show. 'Cause he's stronger than you know. A heart of steel starts to grow. When you've been fighting for it all your life, you've been struggling to make things right. That's how a superhero learns to fly. When you've been fighting for it all your life, control, cause they've taken too much hits. They go blow by blow. Now light a match, stand back, watch him explode. She's got lions in her heart, a fire in her soul. He's got a beast in his belly that's so hard to control, cause they've taken too much hits. They go blow by blow. Now light a match, stand back, watch him explode, 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 explode. When you've been fighting for it all your life, you've been struggling to make things right. That's how a superhero learns to fly. When you've been fighting for it all your life, you've been working every day and night. That's how a superhero learns to fly. Every day, every hour, turn the pain into power. Oh yeah, every day, every hour, turn the pain into power. Oh yeah. Every day, every hour, turn the pain. When you've been fighting for it all your life, you've been struggling to make things right. That's how a superhero learns to fly. I do my best to find some kind of glow. I'm giving it some heart and soul now. From the darkest grays, the sunburst, clouds break. Yeah, we see that fire from the streets of Babylon to the road that we've been on now. The kaleidoscope claims another. This is life in color. Today feels like no other. The darkest grays, the sunburst, clouds break. This is life in motion. And just when I could run this race, no, the sunburst, clouds break. This is life in color. Well, you've seen my worst, and yet you see some hope in me. The black and white set us free, like the queen to the rook. Your decision was a sure thing, honey, yeah, a sure thing. No wonder I feel like I'm missing a heavy load. But no matter what daylight brings to us, we all know. This is life in color. Today feels like no other. In the darkest grays, the sunburst clouds break. This is
First things first, I'ma say all the words inside my head. I'm fired up and tired of the way that things have been. Oh, ooh, the way that things have been. Oh, ooh. Second thing, second, don't you tell me what you think that I can be. I'm the one at the sail, I'm the master of my sea. Oh, ooh, the master of my sea. Oh, ooh. I was broken from a young age, taking my soak into the masses, writing my poems for the few that look at me, took to me, shook at me, feeling me, singing from heartache, from the pain, taking my message from the veins, speaking my lesson from the brain, seeing the beauty